My dad abandoned us when I was 5, so I spent 20 years becoming successful just to buy his company and fire him. What would you do if your father abandoned you and your mom when you were just 5 years old, leaving you to grow up in poverty while he started a new family and built a successful business? Most people would probably try to move on and build their own life. But when my dad walked out on us and never looked back, I made a promise to myself that one day I would become successful enough to destroy everything he'd built. And 20 years later, I kept that promise by buying his company and giving him exactly what he deserved: nothing. I'm Michael Chen, and I'm 25 years old. Until last month, my father, David Chen, thought I was just another competitor trying to buy his manufacturing company. He had no idea that the anonymous investor who'd been systematically acquiring his debt and putting pressure on his business was the 5-year-old son he'd abandoned 2 decades ago. And he definitely didn't expect that son to walk into his office as the new owner and personally hand him his termination papers. My earliest memory of my father is watching him pack a suitcase while my mom cried in the kitchen. I was 5 years old and I didn't understand why Daddy was putting all his clothes in a bag or why Mommy was so upset. I thought maybe we were going on a trip together. "Daddy, where are we going?" I asked, tugging on his pant leg. He looked down at me with an expression I now recognize as guilt mixed with impatience. "I'm going away for a while, Michael. You need to be a good boy and take care of your mother." "When are you coming back?" "I don't know, son. Maybe someday." That was the last conversation I had with my father for 20 years. He walked out that door and never came back, never called, and never sent so much as a birthday card. But he didn't just abandon his family, he left us in financial ruin. My mom discovered that my father had been hiding massive debts and had secretly taken out a second mortgage on our house without telling her. He'd been using the money to fund a new business venture while lying to my mom about our family's financial situation. When he left, he took what little money we had in our joint accounts and left us with debt we couldn't pay. We lost the house within 6 months. My mom, who had been a stay-at-home mother, suddenly had to find work while also taking care of a traumatized 5-year-old. We moved into a tiny apartment in the worst part of town, and my mom worked 2 jobs just to keep us fed and housed. Those early years were brutal. We shopped at thrift stores and food banks. I wore hand-me-down clothes that never fit properly. I watched my mom cry herself to sleep night after night, exhausted from 16-hour workdays and the stress of raising a child alone. But my mom never spoke badly about my father, even though she had every right to hate him. When I asked where Daddy was, she'd say he was working far away and couldn't visit. When I asked why he didn't call, she'd say he was very busy but that he loved me very much. It wasn't until I was 10 years old that I learned the truth about why my father had left. I overheard my mom talking to my aunt about how David had been having an affair with his secretary and had left us to start a new family with her. He married her 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my aunt said, and now they have a baby together. He's playing happy family while Michael doesn't even have a father. "He made his choice," my mom replied, her voice tired. "I just hope someday Michael understands that his father's choices don't reflect on his worth as a person." But that conversation changed something fundamental in me. My father hadn't left because of work or circumstances beyond his control. He'd chosen to abandon me and my mom to start over with someone else. He'd decided that his new family was more important than the one he already had. That night, I made a promise to myself that would define the next 15 years of my life. I was going to become so successful that my father would regret abandoning us. I was going to build something so impressive that he'd realize what he'd lost when he walked away from his son. I threw myself into school with an intensity that worried my mom. I studied constantly, earned perfect grades, and applied for every scholarship and academic program I could find. I worked part-time jobs from age 14, saving every penny I could for college. When guidance counselors asked about my career goals, I had a specific answer. I wanted to study business and finance so I could become successful enough to buy companies. When they asked why, I told them I wanted to make sure my mom never had to worry about money again. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. What I really wanted was to become powerful enough to destroy my father's life, the way he destroyed ours. I researched my father obsessively throughout high school. I learned that he'd used the money he'd stolen from our family to start Chen Manufacturing, a company that made automotive parts for major car manufacturers. He'd built it into a successful business worth several $1 million. He lived in a mansion in the suburbs with his new wife and their two children, the family he'd chosen over us. I found photos of him online at industry events and charity galas, always smiling and looking successful. In interviews, he talked about the importance of family values and hard work. He presented himself as a self-made entrepreneur who'd built his company from nothing, never mentioning that his nothing had included stealing from his first family. Reading about his success while living in our tiny apartment and watching my mom work herself to exhaustion filled me with a rage that I channeled into motivation. Every A I earned, every scholarship I won, every business skill I developed was a step toward my ultimate goal. I graduated valedictorian from high school and earned a full scholarship to study business at the University of Pennsylvania. I majored in finance and corporate strategy, graduating summa cum laude, and immediately entering an MBA program. But I didn't just focus on academics. I started small businesses throughout college: a tutoring service, a meal delivery company for students, a consulting firm that helped local businesses with their marketing. By the time I graduated with my MBA at 23, I had built a portfolio of successful ventures and accumulated significant capital. My mom was proud of my success, but she was also concerned about my intensity and single-minded focus on business. "Michael, I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished," she told me at my MBA graduation. "But I hope you're not doing all this just to prove something to your father. You don't owe him anything, and you don't need his validation." "I'm not doing this for his validation, Mom. I'm doing this for justice." After graduation, I moved to Chicago and started an investment firm specializing in acquiring and restructuring struggling manufacturing companies. I chose this field specifically because I'd been tracking Chen Manufacturing's financial performance for years, and I knew the automotive parts industry was becoming increasingly competitive. My strategy was patient and methodical. I built my firm's reputation by successfully turning around several small manufacturing companies, proving that I could identify undervalued assets and improve operational efficiency. I cultivated relationships with banks, private equity firms, and industry leaders who could provide capital and expertise for larger acquisitions. But while I was building my public success, I was also conducting a private investigation into my father's business. I hired forensic accountants to analyze Chen Manufacturing's financial statements. I cultivated relationships with his suppliers and customers. I studied every aspect of his operations to identify weaknesses and vulnerabilities. What I discovered was that Chen Manufacturing was not as stable as it appeared. My father had been taking on increasing debt to fund expansion, and his profit margins were shrinking due to competition from overseas manufacturers. The company was profitable but fragile, dependent on a few major customers, and vulnerable to economic downturns. More importantly, I found evidence that my father had been using some of the same financial manipulation tactics that had destroyed our family 20 years earlier. He was hiding debt through complex financial structures, inflating revenue through questionable accounting practices, and misrepresenting the company's financial position to investors and lenders. My father was still a fraud, just operating on a larger scale. That's when I decided it was time to make my move. I began quietly acquiring Chen Manufacturing's debt through shell companies and intermediaries. When suppliers or lenders wanted to sell Chen's obligations, my investment firm would purchase them at discounted rates. I also started competing directly with Chen Manufacturing for major contracts, using my industry knowledge and financial resources to underbid them on key projects. I hired away some of their best engineers and salespeople by offering better compensation packages. My father had no idea who was behind the increasing pressure on his business. To him, I was just another competitor in an increasingly difficult market. The process took 18 months, but gradually I gained control of enough of Chen Manufacturing's debt to force a restructuring. When companies can't meet their debt obligations, creditors can demand changes in management, operations, or ownership structure. I coordinated with other major creditors to demand that Chen Manufacturing either find new capital or agree to a sale. My father tried to raise funds through traditional channels, but I'd been quietly discouraging potential investors by sharing information about the company's hidden financial problems. Finally, Chen Manufacturing was forced to consider acquisition offers. My investment firm submitted a bid that was competitive but not obviously generous. I wanted to buy the company for fair market value, not overpay for the privilege of revenge. When my offer was accepted, I insisted on handling the ownership transition personally, rather than delegating it to subordinates. I wanted to be the one to walk into my father's office and tell him his career was over. The day of the final ownership transfer, I drove to Chen Manufacturing's headquarters, a building I'd driven past dozens of times over the years but had never entered. I wore my best suit and carried a briefcase containing the termination papers I'd been preparing for months. My father was waiting in the conference room with his attorney and accountant, expecting to meet with representatives from the investment firm that had purchased his company. He looked older than in his recent photos, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in his earlier success portraits. When I walked into the room, he looked confused. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. We're expecting to meet with the new owners of the company." "There's no mistake," I said, setting my briefcase on the table. "I'm Michael Chen, managing partner of Phoenix Investment Group. I'm the new owner of Chen Manufacturing." My father stared at me for a long moment, and I could see recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. "Michael, you're my son?" "I was your son until you abandoned me and my mother 20 years ago to start a new family." The room was completely silent. My father's attorney and accountant looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing they were witnessing a personal confrontation they hadn't expected. I I don't understand. How did you how did I become successful enough to buy your company? I spent 20 years building the skills and resources I needed to destroy everything you built with the money you stole from us. My father's face went pale. "Michael, I know I made mistakes when you were young, but—" "Mistakes?" I interrupted. "You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to have an affair. You chose to steal money from your family. You chose to abandon your 5-year-old son. And you chose to build your success on a foundation of fraud and deception." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the termination papers. "David Chen, as the new owner of this company, I'm informing you that your employment is terminated effective immediately. You have 30 minutes to clear out your personal belongings and surrender all company property." "Michael, please, we need to talk about this. I know I hurt you and your mother, but destroying my company won't fix what happened." "You're right, it won't fix what happened, but it will ensure that you experience the same financial devastation and uncertainty that you inflicted on us. You'll get to find out what it feels like to lose everything because of someone else's choices." My father tried to negotiate, offering to give me a position in the company, suggesting we could work together to rebuild our relationship. But I wasn't interested in reconciliation. I was interested in justice. "You have 28 minutes left," I said, checking my watch. I watched my father pack his personal belongings into a cardboard box. Family photos from his second marriage, awards and recognition plaques, personal items that represented 20 years of success built on my family's ruin. As he was leaving, he turned back to me. "I know you hate me and maybe I deserve that, but I want you to know that I thought about you and your mother every day. I regretted leaving you, but I didn't know how to come back. You could have called. You could have sent money. You could have acknowledged that I existed. Instead, you built a new family and pretended we never happened. I was ashamed. I knew I destroyed your lives, and I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. So you decided that was easier than trying to make amends or take responsibility for what you'd done." My father nodded, tears in his eyes. "I was a coward. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry for everything." "I know you are, but being sorry doesn't undo 20 years of abandonment and financial hardship. Your apology doesn't give me back my childhood or give my mother back her youth." After my father left, I spent the afternoon meeting with Chen Manufacturing's senior staff. I explained that there would be significant changes in the company's direction and management, but that I was committed to maintaining employment for workers who weren't responsible for the previous owner's poor decisions. I promoted several talented employees who had been overlooked under my father's leadership. I implemented new financial controls to ensure transparency and accountability. And I restructured the company's operations to focus on innovation and customer service, rather than the financial manipulation that had characterized my father's management style. Within 6 months, Chen Manufacturing was more profitable and stable than it had been in years. The new leadership team had improved efficiency, won several major contracts, and restored the company's reputation in the industry. But the most satisfying moment came when I was able to pay off my mother's mortgage and buy her a house in the neighborhood where we'd lived before my father abandoned us. She cried when I handed her the deed, not because she was sad, but because she was proud of what I'd accomplished. I never wanted you to spend your life trying to get revenge on your father, she told me, but I'm proud that you channeled your pain into something positive and that you never let his abandonment define your worth. My father's life, meanwhile, fell apart quickly. Without the income from Chen Manufacturing, he couldn't maintain his expensive lifestyle. He had to sell his mansion and move to a smaller house. His second wife left him when the money ran out, taking their children with her. He tried to start a new business, but his reputation in the industry was damaged by the circumstances of his departure from Chen Manufacturing. Potential partners and investors were wary of working with someone who'd lost his own company to his estranged son. 6 months after I fired him, my father called me. I almost didn't answer the phone, but curiosity got the better of me. "Michael, I wanted to thank you," he said, his voice quiet and tired. "Thank me?" "Losing everything helped me understand what I put you and your mother through. I spent 20 years thinking I was successful, but I was just running from the consequences of my choices. You forced me to face what I'd done. And what have you learned? That success built on other people's suffering isn't really success at all. That abandoning my responsibilities as a father was the worst mistake I ever made. And that you became a better man than I ever was despite growing up without me." I was quiet for a long time. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction that my father was finally experiencing consequences for his actions. But mostly I just felt tired and empty. "I don't forgive you," I told him, "and I don't want a relationship with you. But I hope you've learned something from this experience." "I have. And Michael, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into strength. That's something I was never capable of doing." That was the last conversation I had with my father. He moved to another state and disappeared from my life as completely as he had 20 years earlier. But this time, it was his choice to stay away, rather than mine to be abandoned. Today, Chen Manufacturing is one of the most successful automotive parts companies in the region. I've created jobs for hundreds of people, implemented ethical business practices, and proven that success doesn't require stepping on other people. My mother is healthy and happy, living in financial security for the first time since my father left us. She's proud of what I have accomplished, but she's also relieved that I've moved beyond the anger and resentment that drove me for so many years. The lesson I learned is that revenge is a powerful motivator, but it's not a sustainable source of happiness. Destroying my father's life gave me temporary satisfaction, but building something positive from the ruins of our relationship has given me lasting fulfillment. My father thought he could abandon his responsibilities and start over without consequences. He learned that some choices follow you forever, and that the children you abandon sometimes grow up to be stronger than you ever imagined. I spent 20 years becoming the man my father never was. Someone who keeps promises, takes responsibility for his actions, and doesn't run away when life gets difficult. That's the best revenge of all, becoming everything your absent parent failed to be. Chen Manufacturing's mission statement, which I wrote personally, reads, "Success built on integrity, commitment to family, and responsibility to community." It's everything my father's company wasn't, and everything I promised myself I would become. Sometimes the best way to heal from abandonment isn't to find the person who left you. It's to become someone they could never be.